The morning sun rose slow and golden over the wide Montana plains, spilling light over Caleb Turner's ranch, a stretch of land as stubborn and enduring as the man who owned it. Caleb had worked these acres since he was 16, breaking wild horses and carving a life out of dirt and sweat. Now, at 32, he was known in Willow Creek as a man who needed no one, especially not a wife. He'd seen what love could do to men. His own father had drunk himself into the grave after losing Caleb's mother to fever, leaving behind debts and a ranch on the edge of ruin. Caleb had sworn then that no woman would ever be his undoing. He worked from sunup to sundown, kept his accounts clean, and trusted only a few men, chief among them, his smooth-talking cousin, Jed Turner. Jed had a smile that could sell lies as easy as silver. He'd drifted in and out of Caleb's life, always with a new scheme, a new story, and a promise that never quite came true. So when Jed rode into the ranch that spring, hat in hand and a document in his coat pocket, Caleb didn't think much of it. Just a formality, Jed had said, laying the paper on Caleb's desk. Partnership agreement for the cattle sale next month. The mayor's backing it. You sign, we both profit. Caleb had frowned at the fine print but trusted his blood. Jed's penmanship was clean, the words seemed ordinary enough. He scrawled his signature and thought nothing more of it. What he didn't know, what Jed knew all too well, was that the document was no business contract. It was a marriage certificate, already filed and witnessed by the mayor, himself, and the bride's name written in delicate script across. The line beneath his own was Eleanor Hayes. Eleanor was known, in town as the Hayes Spinster. She was 34, quiet, and plain as the brown shawl she always wore. But beneath that modest exterior lay a woman of deep strength and quiet intelligence. Her father, once a respected judge, had fallen ill and half-blind, leaving her to manage their failing household. When Jed approached her, offering a marriage arrangement that would save her father's property from foreclosure, she didn't realize she was walking into a trap either. Your father's debts will be cleared, Jed had told her, voice smooth as oil. And the man you're marrying? A rancher of good name. You'll be safe. Safe. That was all Eleanor wanted, for her father to die in peace, without the shame of losing their home. She signed, believing it was a business arrangement. Only later, when she stood before the preacher and saw Caleb Turner's startled, furious face staring back at her, did she realize she had been deceived. The ceremony was a blur of whispers. The townsfolk had gathered out of curiosity, their laughter muffled behind lace gloves and tobacco smoke. Caleb's jaw was locked tight as the preacher read the vows. "Do you take this woman? I don't even know her!" Caleb snapped. But Jed's hand was on his shoulder, his voice a hiss in his ear. "Too late now, cousin. The papers are filed. You walk away, it'll be your good name that's ruined." Eleanor's eyes dropped to the floor, shame burning her cheeks. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, small and composed, and whispered, "I do." Caleb's answer was silence. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and a round of awkward applause followed. When they left the church, Caleb turned to her, eyes dark as a storm. "I don't know what game you're playing, Miss Hayes, but it ends today." Eleanor met his gaze evenly. "I didn't want this either, Mr. Turner. But it seems we're both prisoners of someone else's trick." The wind picked up, carrying the dust of the street between them. Caleb tipped his hat low, jaw clenched, and mounted his horse without another word. As he rode away, Eleanor stood alone on the steps of the church, the unwanted bride of a furious man. And the first chapter of a story neither of them yet understood had just begun. The next morning, the gossip in Willow Creek had spread faster than wildfire across dry grass. By sunrise, everyone from the blacksmith to the baker's wife knew that Caleb Turner, the proud rancher who'd sworn never to marry, had been tricked into wedding Eleanor Hayes, the town's quiet spinster. Most laughed behind her back. Some pitied her. But Eleanor had learned long ago that people's tongues were sharper than knives, and wounds from words often cut deeper than steel. She rose before dawn in her small rented room, her father's soft breathing audible through the thin wall. The morning light touched his face, once stern, now frail and lined with pain. Judge Samuel Hayes had once been a man of authority and principle, a figure the whole county respected. Now he could barely stand, his eyes clouded, his mind slipping in and out of clarity. Eleanor brushed his gray hair back gently and poured him tea. "You must rest, Father." "I'll take care of everything," she whispered. He nodded weakly, murmuring something about the land, about keeping their name honorable. And that, more than anything, was why she'd agreed to Jed Turner's so-called proposal. Jed had come to her weeks earlier, smiling like a savior. "Miss Hayes," he'd said, "your father's property is in danger. The bank's ready to take it, but I know a way to protect you both. My cousin Caleb needs a wife on paper, nothing more. It'll secure some legal advantages for both sides. Just a signature. Nothing improper. It had sounded reasonable. She'd been desperate, cornered. She'd signed, believing she was doing what any dutiful daughter would do. Now she understood the trap she'd fallen into, and yet Eleanor wasn't the type to crumble. Her quiet, unremarkable exterior hid a spine of tempered steel. She had survived loss, loneliness, and years of small-town cruelty. She would survive this, too. When Caleb arrived at her door later that day, his anger was barely contained. His boots struck the floorboards like gunshots. "You will not stay here," he said flatly. "Pack your things. You'll live at my ranch until this mess is sorted out. I won't have my name dragged further through town gossip by leaving my wife alone." Eleanor met his glare without flinching. "As you wish, Mr. Turner. But let me make one thing clear. I didn't want this either. I won't be a burden to you." His jaw tightened. "See that you're not." And just like that, they rode out together, two strangers bound by deceit, both too proud to admit how deeply they'd been wronged. At the ranch, the hired hands stopped their work to stare. Whispers followed them from the barn to the porch. Caleb led her inside wordlessly, showing her to a small room off the kitchen. "This will do," he said. "You'll have food, a roof, and nothing more. When I get the marriage annulled, you'll be free to go." "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm. "But until then, I'll earn my keep." Caleb paused, surprised. "How? I know accounts. And I can manage a household better than most men manage a ledger." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "We'll see." What he didn't know, what no one in town knew, was that Eleanor Hayes was more than a dutiful daughter. She was the quiet mind behind half the businesses in Willow Creek. For years, local shopkeepers had come to her in secret for help with numbers, taxes, and debts. She kept their books balanced and their secrets safe, never taking credit. So when she sat down that evening and began sorting through the ranch's dusty records, she noticed something immediately. Jed Turner's name appeared too many times in the ledgers. Too many missing payments. Too many investments that didn't add up. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. For the first time since that humiliating wedding, she felt something stirring in her chest, not despair, but determination. If Jed Turner thought she was some meek spinster he could use and discard, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The church bells of Willow Creek rang that morning with a hollow sound, echoing off the dusty main street. Folks came not for worship, but for spectacle. Word had spread like wildfire. Caleb Turner, the proud rancher who had once declared, "A man's ranch don't need lace or tears," was marrying the Hayes spinster, a woman he barely knew and clearly didn't want. Inside the small clapboard church, the air was thick with whispers and perfume. The preacher looked nervous, his hands trembling as he flipped through his worn Bible. Caleb stood at the front, stiff as a fence post, jaw tight enough to crack teeth. He hadn't slept all night after discovering Jed's deceit. When he'd ridden to the mayor's office at dawn, he found the papers already stamped, signed, and witnessed. Legal, binding, his name beside hers in ink that might as well have been blood. Jed was gone, vanished with a grin and a pocket full of Caleb's trust. Now, standing there under God's roof, Caleb felt trapped, humiliated, and furious. Eleanor entered quietly, her arm looped through her father's for the last time. Judge Hayes, weak and trembling, seemed barely aware of what was happening. Yet Eleanor held herself upright, her posture dignified, her chin slightly lifted, even as whispers rippled through the pews. There she is. Poor thing. She's not poor anymore. She's a Turner now, if he keeps her. He won't. He'll throw her out by sundown. Eleanor heard every word, each syllable cutting like a blade. But she did not flinch. She'd spent her whole life being invisible. Today she would at least face her fate with quiet grace. The preacher cleared his throat. We are gathered here today in the sight of Almighty God. Caleb's eyes were fixed on the floorboards, his shoulders rigid. When the time came for vows, the preacher turned to him first. Do you, Caleb Turner, take Eleanor Hayes to be your lawful wedded wife? Caleb hesitated. His throat worked, but no sound came. The silence stretched, heavy and painful. Then, through gritted teeth, he said, I do. It was not a promise. It was surrender. When the preacher turned to Eleanor, she answered softly, I do. Her voice steady, though her heart trembled. You may now seal your vows with a kiss, the preacher said uncertainly. Caleb stepped forward, but stopped short. He tipped his hat instead and muttered, That won't be necessary. A low murmur rippled through the church. Someone snickered. Someone else coughed to hide their laughter. Eleanor lowered her gaze and whispered, As you wish. And just like that, the ceremony ended. No music, no cheer. Only the slow scrape of boots as the guests filed out, whispering like dry leaves. Outside, the sun blazed cruelly. Caleb strode ahead, fists clenched. When Eleanor caught up, he turned sharply. This isn't a marriage, he said coldly. It's a mistake, a trick. I'll see it undone. I never wanted it either, she replied, calm but firm. You have my word. I'll not hold you to vows made in deceit. Her composure caught him off guard. He'd expected tears or pleading. Instead, she looked him square in the eye, not as a victim, but as an equal. Still, anger hardened him. You'll stay at my ranch till it's sorted. I won't have the town calling me a man who abandoned his wife, fake or not. As you wish, Mr. Turner. Her voice was quiet, but something in her tone made him pause. It wasn't submission, it was dignity. That evening, when they returned to the ranch, the household fell into uneasy silence. The ranch hands avoided their eyes. Even the horses seemed to sense the tension. Caleb showed her to a small room near the kitchen. You'll sleep here, he said curtly. We'll keep this arrangement civil until I fix it. Eleanor nodded. Thank you, Mr. Turner. I'll not trouble you. She closed the door softly behind her. Only then, in the privacy of that bare little room, did she allow herself a single deep breath, a release of all she'd held in. Outside, Caleb stood on the porch, watching the sun dip below the ridgeline. He told himself he hated her, hated what she represented, but deep down, beneath the anger and the pride, something unsettled stirred. A whisper he didn't want to name, because the way she'd looked at him, unbroken and unafraid, wasn't the look of a woman who'd ruined his life. It was the look of someone who might just change it. The days that followed their unwanted wedding were colder than any Montana winter. Caleb Turner barely spoke to his new wife. When he did, his words were clipped, practical, and heavy with resentment. He'd made up his mind that she would be gone as soon as the legal papers allowed it. Until then, she was a guest, nothing more. But Eleanor Hayes had lived her whole life being unwanted. Silence didn't frighten her. Cruel words didn't break her. She carried on with quiet composure, determined to maintain dignity even inside a home that clearly didn't want her. On her second morning at the Turner Ranch, she rose before sunrise. The sky was a soft lavender, the land still wrapped in mist. The ranch hands were stirring in the bunkhouse, and the scent of strong coffee filled the air. When she stepped into the kitchen, the cook, a stout, gruff woman named May, looked her up and down. You're the new missus? May asked, one brow raised. Eleanor offered a polite smile. Only in name, Mrs. May, but I'll do my share. May snorted, but didn't argue. She handed Eleanor an apron and pointed to the flour sacks. If you can make biscuits that don't break teeth, you'll be the first woman around here who can. By breakfast, the table was filled with steaming bread, thick gravy, and eggs fried just right. The ranch hands stared in disbelief. Caleb said nothing, only ate in silence. But May gave a satisfied grunt and muttered, Guess she can cook after all. Later that day, Eleanor wandered the ranch, studying its rhythm. The barn was sound, the horses healthy, but the books were another story. She asked Caleb for permission to review the accounts. He frowned. "You think I don't know how to run my own ranch?" "I think you've been too busy working it to notice someone's been cheating you," she said quietly. He opened his mouth to retort, but the certainty in her eyes stopped him. With a curt nod, he handed her the ledgers. That evening, by lamplight, she sat at the table, tracing each line of numbers with careful precision. Within an hour, she found the pattern. Payments misrecorded, supplies charged twice, and cattle sold off the books. Jed's name appeared again and again. When Caleb returned from the stables, tired and dust-covered, she pushed the ledger toward him. "Your cousin's been stealing from you for months." He stared at the figures, his face darkening. "You're sure?" "I am," she said simply. "And I can fix it." Something flickered in his eyes, half disbelief, half respect. "You can fix my accounts?" She smiled faintly. "Numbers are easier than people, Mr. Turner. They don't lie. He didn't say thank you." But when he walked away, there was a thoughtful look in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Over the next few weeks, life on the ranch began to shift. Eleanor's quiet efficiency brought order where chaos had reigned. The men began to greet her with nods instead of curious stares. She kept their meals hearty, their wages fair, and their schedules running smooth. When one of the younger ranch hands fell from a horse and broke his arm, Eleanor rode into town herself to fetch the doctor, staying up all night by the boy's side. By morning, Caleb found her asleep in the chair beside the bunkhouse bed, a cool cloth still resting on the boy's forehead. He stood in the doorway watching her, this woman he'd dismissed as plain and meddlesome. Her hair had come loose from its pins, a soft curl brushing her cheek, something in his chest twisted. She wasn't beautiful in the way men in saloons admired. But there was something else, something steady, warm, and strong that made him feel as though, for the first time in years, the house didn't echo quite so empty. Still, Caleb was too proud to admit it. He told himself it was gratitude, nothing more. She'd proven useful, yes, but that didn't mean he owed her affection, and yet, every night when he saw the lamplight still burning in her room, the thought crossed his mind unbidden. Maybe being married to Eleanor Hayes isn't the worst mistake I've ever made. The skies over Montana darkened faster than anyone anticipated that afternoon. What had started as a calm, bright day turned ominous, the clouds rolling in like a black tide over the endless plains. Caleb Turner, ever vigilant about his ranch and livestock, noticed the first sharp gusts of wind while checking the fences on the northern pasture. His prized mare, Starlight, skittered nervously in her stall, nostrils flaring, ears pinned back. Caleb tightened the reins and urged her forward, ignoring the storm clouds that now raced toward the horizon. He had cattle to round up before the rain could sweep the plains, and no storm, no matter how sudden, would keep him from his duty. But storms in Montana were deceptive. Within minutes, the wind had transformed into a torrent, whipping dust and debris into his eyes. Thunder rolled overhead and rain slashed across the landscape like thrown knives. Caleb's mare, startled by the sound of a nearby branch snapping, bolted. "Starlight, no!" he shouted, but she had already bolted across the field, carrying him with her. Hours earlier, Eleanor had been sorting through the ranch accounts in the kitchen. The smell of fresh bread lingered in the air, and the warmth of the stove had been a small comfort. Then the wind began to howl, rattling the windows and sending a chill through the room. She rose, instinctively scanning the horizon. Something was wrong. The horses were restless, and Caleb was nowhere to be seen. She grabbed her cloak and boots without hesitation. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with certainty that danger had found its way to him. She mounted her horse, Silver, and spurred him into the storm. Mud and rain clung to her cloak, but she didn't slow. The prairie was treacherous, lightning cutting through the clouds and illuminating the path ahead in brief, blinding flashes. When she reached the northern pastures, she found him. Caleb had been thrown from Starlight when the horse tripped on a slick patch of mud. He was sprawled in the wet grass, shivering, the storm lashing at him as if the elements themselves were punishing him. Eleanor dismounted in a splash of rain and mud, her hands steady despite the chaos. "Caleb!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the thunder. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his shoulder made him grimace. "Stay back!" he snapped, his pride warring with necessity. "It's too dangerous." "Not for me," she said firmly. She grabbed his arm, her strength surprising him, and helped him to his feet. "You've got to trust me." The ride back to the ranch was slow and treacherous. Eleanor kept one hand on Caleb and the other on the reins, guiding Silver through the mud and deepening pools of water. Lightning illuminated her face, and Caleb couldn't help but notice how determined and fearless she was, even as the storm screamed around them. By the time they reached the porch, soaked to the bone and trembling, Caleb realized he could hardly speak. She had risked herself to save him, his pride bruised more than his body. Inside, Eleanor helped him to a chair, tended to his wounds, and wrapped a dry blanket around his shoulders. Caleb sat in silence, watching her work with quiet, attentive hands. For the first time, he saw her not as a spinster, a stranger, or a pawn in Jed Turner's deceit, but as someone brave, capable, and fiercely loyal. The image of her determined face, the strength in her hands, and the steadiness of her actions would linger with him long after the storm passed. As she finally allowed herself to rest, dozing lightly in a chair nearby, Caleb's thoughts betrayed him. He had spent weeks resisting her, ignoring her contributions, and holding on to his anger. But now, watching her breathe softly, he felt something unfamiliar, a stirring of admiration, a twinge of gratitude, and, perhaps, the first whisper of affection. The storm outside raged on, but inside the ranch, something else was awakening. A fragile understanding that Eleanor Hayes might be more than just the spinster he had been tricked into marrying. She might be the woman who could truly touch his heart. The days after the storm were quieter on the Turner Ranch, but not for long. Willow Creek had a way of turning the smallest event into gossip that spread like wildfire, and the storm, combined with Caleb's near injury, had given the townsfolk plenty to talk about. Whispers of the Turner rescue circulated in hushed tones at the general store, the saloon, and the blacksmith's forge. Most of the rumors were harmless curiosity, but some were sharpened with malice. Jed Turner, furious at losing leverage over his cousin and Eleanor, had begun planting lies, claiming that Eleanor orchestrated the storm's aftermath to gain control of the ranch. Even though Caleb had seen firsthand that she had risked her life to save him, the whispers gnawed at his pride. One afternoon, Caleb returned from checking the northern fence to find Eleanor calmly tending the horses. Her sleeves rolled up, her hands steady despite the sunburn forming on her arms. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Eleanor, I need to speak with you," Caleb said, his voice tighter than usual. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped closer. "Of course, Caleb, what is it?" He motioned to the yard, lowering his voice. "I've heard the rumors. Some say you somehow—" He stopped, frustrated. "They say you've been plotting to take over the ranch." Eleanor's eyes widened in a mixture of surprise and pain. She had expected suspicion from some of the ranch hands, perhaps even quiet judgment from Caleb at first. But to hear the man she had risked her life for voice, it hurt more than the cold Montana wind ever could. "I would never, ever do such a thing," she said firmly. "I came here because I had no choice, and I stayed because I wanted to honor my father's wishes. Everything I've done has been to keep this ranch and you safe, not to take anything for myself." Caleb's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. He wanted to argue, to assert that he didn't need her help, that he didn't trust her. Yet the memory of the storm, the way she had braved the rain and wind, holding him steady, refusing to let him fall, haunted him. He knew the truth of her courage and loyalty. I believe you," he admitted finally, the words gruff yet tinged with sincerity. "But the town won't, and I can't ignore that." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Then let them whisper. I don't care what the town thinks of me, as long as you know the truth." Her calmness, her unwavering honesty, struck something deep within Caleb. He realized that for all his pride and stubbornness, he had been wrong about her from the start. She wasn't a weak, meek spinster to be dismissed. She was a woman of substance, with strength he could scarcely match. Over the next few days, Caleb watched her in a new light. She managed the ranch hands with patience and fairness. She found errors in the ledgers that even he had missed, and she kept the house running in a way that no hired help ever had. Even the skeptical ranch hands began to respect her, murmuring approval when she resolved conflicts or cared for an injured animal. Despite himself, Caleb found his irritation softening. He still refused to call her wife with affection, still kept a sharp tone when giving orders. But beneath it, a grudging admiration grew. He began to notice the little things, the quiet way she adjusted the saddles so they wouldn't rub, the way she always remembered which horse preferred oats instead of hay, the faint smile she offered when no one was looking. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the plains in orange and gold, Caleb sat on the porch, ledger in hand, but his mind elsewhere. He thought of Eleanor, of her courage, her quiet authority, and the way she had held herself steady when the world tried to tear her down. He realized, with a reluctant honesty, that his resentment was fading. Bit by bit, he found himself trusting her, and more than that, admiring her. The woman he had once called a spinster was slowly but surely proving herself worthy not just of respect, but perhaps of something more. And for the first time since the wedding, Caleb felt a stirring in his chest he couldn't name. Autumn had settled over Willow Creek, painting the plains in gold and amber. The town was alive with preparations for the harvest dance, a yearly tradition where locals gathered to celebrate the season's bounty. It was a lively affair of music, lanterns, and laughter, and for most, an opportunity to flirt, show off a new dress, or simply enjoy a night away from work. Caleb Turner had no intention of attending. He had long avoided social events, preferring the quiet routine of the ranch to the whispers and stares of the townsfolk. But this year something was different. The mayor had insisted, gently reminding Caleb that as a landowner and community pillar, his absence would be noted, and not favorably. When Eleanor mentioned she had received an invitation as well, the thought of her attending alone struck a chord in Caleb's chest. He had tried to dismiss it, but he could not ignore the image of her facing the town's scrutiny by herself. On the evening of the dance, the main hall was a riot of color and sound. Lanterns swayed from the rafters, casting golden light over the polished floorboards. Music poured from the fiddle and piano, creating a rhythm that had every ranch hand tapping their boots involuntarily. Whispers about Caleb's strange new bride filled the corners of the room, some mocking, others curious. Eleanor stood at the edge of the hall, her usual modest attire replaced by a simple yet elegant blue dress she had sewn herself. It was not showy, but it suited her perfectly, graceful, dignified, and confident. She held herself upright, shoulders back, chin lifted, facing the stares and whispers without flinching. Caleb, standing near the doorway, felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Pride, yes, but also admiration and perhaps the beginnings of awe. The woman he had dismissed as a spinster, a minor annoyance in his life, now seemed luminous in the lantern light. He approached her quietly, drawing the attention of a few onlookers who whispered in surprise. "You will dance," he said firmly. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. I don't know how, Mr. Turner. I haven't danced in years." "Then you'll learn," he said gruffly, but with a faint edge of humor he could not hide. He extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" For the first time since their forced marriage, Eleanor hesitated, not out of fear, but out of wonder. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The room seemed to quiet, the music filling the spaces between their uncertainty. As they stepped onto the floor, Caleb's rough, calloused hands guided her with surprising care. His movements were precise, protective, yet hesitant, as though he feared breaking something fragile. Eleanor responded naturally, following his lead, her body moving with a quiet elegance that belied her modest upbringing. For the first few moments, the townsfolk watched in silence. The woman they had once mocked and pitied now moved with confidence beside the man they all revered. Laughter and whispers quieted into admiration, and even the older ranchers exchanged glances, nodding in approval. Caleb felt something shift inside him. He had always believed he knew everything about strength, courage, and loyalty, but Eleanor was showing him a new kind of power. She could hold her own, command respect, and yet inspire something gentle, something protective, even in him. Their eyes met as the music swelled. A flicker of something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, recognition, and a dawning realization that their lives were beginning to intertwine in ways neither had expected. The dance ended too soon for Caleb, but neither moved to leave immediately, lingering in a shared silence that spoke louder than words. By the time they returned to the ranch, the air was cooler, carrying the scent of harvested fields and smoke from nearby chimneys. Caleb realized reluctantly that the woman he had once vowed to dismiss had begun to occupy his thoughts. Not as a nuisance or an obligation, but as someone vital, someone he could no longer ignore. For the first time, he understood that admiration, respect, and perhaps even affection could coexist with the stubborn pride he had carried for so long. Eleanor had stepped into the dance as the town's spinster, but she left as something far more powerful. The woman who had begun to capture his attention and, perhaps unknowingly, his heart. The calm that had settled over the Turner Ranch after the harvest dance was fragile, and in Willow Creek, peace never lasted long. Jed Turner, furious at losing control over both Caleb and Eleanor, had been quietly plotting his revenge. He had always been clever with schemes, but this time his plan was sharper, more devious. He intended to steal the ranch by forging documents that implicated Eleanor as the mastermind behind the theft. It began with a simple envelope slid beneath the ranch door one morning. Caleb picked it up, noticing the neat handwriting and the official stamp. Opening it, he found documents outlining illegal claims against the Turner property, listing Eleanor as the instigator. His jaw tightened. Anger rose first, then disbelief. Could Eleanor have betrayed him after everything? He stormed into the house, his boots clattering on the wooden floor. Eleanor looked up from the table where she had been reviewing the day's accounts. Her calm expression faltered only slightly when she saw the papers in his hand. "Caleb, let me explain," she said quickly, rising. "I need no explanation." Caleb snapped, tossing the envelope onto the table. "It's right here. Your name on these documents." "You've been plotting against me this entire time?" Eleanor's face went pale, but she stood her ground. "I swear to you, Caleb, I had nothing to do with this." "Look at the handwriting. It isn't mine. This is Jed's work." Caleb hesitated, his anger clashing with the memory of her courage in the storm, her quiet wisdom with the ranch accounts, and the grace she displayed in every aspect of life. He had almost believed her a stranger and a manipulator, but he had also seen firsthand that she was honest and steadfast. Slowly, he nodded. "Then we'll expose him," he said, the edge of resolve replacing his fury. Together, they confronted Jed at the mayor's office. Eleanor presented the correct ledgers, pointing out the forged entries and errors Jed had inserted to frame her. Caleb, usually silent and brooding, spoke with authority and force, demanding an investigation. The mayor and a few townsfolk reviewed the documents, realizing Jed had orchestrated the entire deception. When the truth came out, Jed's face went pale. He stammered, trying to shift blame, but the evidence was undeniable. Caleb's anger, long simmering beneath his calm exterior, finally erupted. Jed was arrested, and the townsfolk, who had once mocked Eleanor as the spinster, watched as she stood confidently beside Caleb, vindicated. After Jed's betrayal was revealed, Caleb and Eleanor returned to the ranch. Silence filled the room for a moment, heavy but not uncomfortable. Caleb finally exhaled and met her eyes. "I should have trusted you from the beginning," he said, voice low but sincere. "I see now. Everything you've done, all the risks you've taken, the care you've shown for this ranch and me, I was blind." Eleanor's lips curved into a small, relieved smile. "It's easy to be blind when you expect to see it. I only hoped that one day you would see the truth." That evening, Caleb found himself watching her as she tidied the kitchen and prepared dinner. Her movements were precise, graceful, and calm, a contrast to the chaos Jed had brought into their lives. He realized something he had been avoiding. The resentment he had carried toward her was gone, replaced by admiration and, quietly, affection. The townsfolk who had doubted Eleanor's abilities now spoke of her with respect. She had survived Jed's betrayal, saved the ranch from ruin, and proven herself a partner, not only capable but indispensable. And Caleb, ever proud, found himself thinking differently about what a marriage could be. This union, forced by trickery, had grown into something stronger, forged in trials and danger. Eleanor had stood unwaveringly by his side, and in doing so, she had begun to steal not just the respect of the town, but his heart as well. As the sun set over the sprawling Montana plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Caleb understood that the real battle had not been against Jed, but against his own pride and stubbornness. And in that quiet reckoning, he realized something else. He did not want Eleanor Hayes to ever leave his life again. With Jed Turner finally removed from their lives and the Turner ranch secure, a calm settled over the property like a soft, welcome blanket. But for Caleb Turner, the quiet was different this time. The storm of anger and betrayal that had dominated his thoughts for weeks had dissipated, leaving room for reflection and, more unexpectedly, for admiration. Eleanor Hayes had proven herself in ways that went far beyond managing accounts or caring for the ranch hands. She had faced danger without hesitation, stood firm under the town's scrutiny, and now, after exposing Jed's treachery, her strength and intelligence had won the respect of even the most skeptical townsfolk. She was no longer the spinster everyone had whispered about. She was a force to be reckoned with, and Caleb had been witness to it all. The realization settled in his chest like a slow-growing ember. He admired her, yes, but he also cared for her. And that care was no longer easy to dismiss. Days passed with quiet routines, mornings spent inspecting fences and livestock, afternoons poring over ledgers, and evenings in the warmth of the kitchen where Eleanor moved with graceful efficiency. The ranch, once chaotic and burdened with mismanagement, now ran smoothly. Caleb began to notice the subtle ways Eleanor enhanced his life. She anticipated problems before they arose, soothed the ranch hands when tensions flared, and even prepared meals that reminded him of home and comfort, not just sustenance. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fencing together, Caleb paused to watch her work. She was focused, her hands calloused yet deft, moving with precision that mirrored his own understanding of the land. The sun glinted on her hair, damp with sweat, and he caught himself smiling, despite the pride that always made him cautious with emotions. "You've changed this ranch more than I ever could have," he said quietly. Eleanor looked up, her eyes softening with warmth. "It's always been capable of more, Caleb. It just needed someone willing to see it." Their hands brushed as they passed tools back and forth, and Caleb felt a jolt he tried and failed to ignore. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, something that whispered of trust, intimacy, and maybe even love. That evening, the townsfolk arrived at the ranch to deliver news of Jed's conviction and to offer congratulations. Eleanor greeted them with quiet dignity while Caleb stood behind her, protective yet proud. For the first time, he noticed how naturally she commanded respect, not through words or threats, but simply by being competent, honest, and kind. Later, when the guests had gone, Caleb and Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the golden sun dip below the Montana horizon. A hush fell over the land, and for the first time they were alone in a silence that felt safe and intimate. "Eleanor," Caleb began, his voice low and uncharacteristically hesitant, I owe you more than I can ever say. Not just for saving the ranch or for everything, but for being you, for showing me what strength and courage look like." She turned toward him, her expression a mixture of relief and tenderness. "Caleb, I never wanted to take anything from you. I only hoped you'd see me for who I am." Their eyes met, and the barriers built from pride, anger, and past misunderstandings began to crumble. For the first time, Caleb allowed himself to imagine a life not just with Eleanor as a housekeeper or partner in the ranch, but as someone essential to his heart and daily existence. The days that followed were marked by small gestures, Caleb seeking Eleanor's counsel on decisions, Eleanor listening patiently and laughing at his rare jokes. They shared meals, stories, and quiet moments of reflection. Their partnership, forged through trials and hardship, was no longer just practical. It was emotional, personal, and deeply rooted. And with each passing day, Caleb realized that the spinster he had once dismissed had quietly claimed his respect, his admiration, and finally his heart. From the ashes of deception, betrayal, and pride, a love had grown. Steady, enduring, and profound, just like the land they worked together, spring had returned to the Montana plains, and with it a sense of renewal, not just for the land, but for the Turner Ranch and its inhabitants. The snow had melted, revealing fields of fresh green grass, rivers swollen with runoff, and the first wildflowers peeking shyly through the thawed earth. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, steady and comforting, and Caleb Turner found that he looked forward to the days in a way he had never before. But it was not just the land that had been renewed. Caleb's heart, long guarded behind walls of pride and resentment, had softened under the patient strength of Eleanor Hayes. The woman he had once dismissed as plain, timid, and inconsequential had, through courage, intelligence, and unwavering honesty, become the center of his world. Every action she took, whether tending the ranch hands, caring for his horses, or managing the ledgers, reminded him that she was indispensable. And yet, it was not her usefulness alone that held him. It was her heart, her bravery, and the quiet warmth she carried in every gesture. On a bright morning, Caleb approached Eleanor while she was tending to the garden. She looked up from planting seedlings, dirt on her hands, hair slightly tousled by the wind, and smiled at him. There was a softness in her expression, an unspoken understanding that had grown between them over months of trials. Dangers and victories, Eleanor, he began, voice steady but layered with emotion. There's something I've been meaning to say. She tilted her head, curious. I've been blind for too long, blind to your courage, your heart, your strength. I've spent too many days angry, too many nights stubborn, refusing to see what was right in front of me. Her eyes glimmered with cautious hope. Caleb, she prompted gently, I can't live another day pretending that this, us, is anything less than what it has become. I married you under duress, yes, but my heart has chosen you every day since. He took her hands in his, calloused and warm, and held them tightly. This time, I'm asking you to marry me. Not because I was forced to, but because I cannot imagine a single day without you at my side. Will you truly be my wife, Eleanor Hayes? Eleanor's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears of joy and relief. She had spent months proving herself, saving the ranch, and standing by him through storms, deceit, and small-town gossip. And now, the man who had once scorned her was asking, not out of obligation, but from the deepest part of his heart. Yes, Caleb, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I will. That evening, they stood on the porch of the ranch, the golden light of sunset spilling across the plains, painting the sky with hues of orange, pink, and lavender. The ranch, once chaotic and full of tension, was alive with peace, prosperity, and the steady rhythm of life they had built together. Caleb and Eleanor stood side by side, hands entwined, hearts aligned in ways neither had anticipated when their union had begun in trickery and deception. The townsfolk of Willow Creek, who had once whispered and judged, now regarded them with admiration and respect. The Turners had weathered storms, deceit, and danger, and their partnership had emerged stronger, built on trust, courage, and love. Caleb's heart swelled as he looked at Eleanor, realizing that what had begun as a forced marriage had transformed into a love deeper than he could have imagined. She had stolen not just his respect, but his heart, completely. As the wind carried the scent of wildflowers across the plains, Eleanor leaned her head on Caleb's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, feeling the solidity of her presence, the warmth of her love, and the promise of a future built together. The trick that had once bound them in frustration and resentment had led to something far greater, a partnership forged in trials, strengthened by trust and sealed with the unspoken promise of enduring love. And on that porch, surrounded by the land they nurtured and the life they shared, Caleb Turner understood, finally and fully, that he had found his home, not just on the ranch, but in Eleanor Hayes's heart. The plains stretched endlessly before them, vast and open, a mirror of the life they would now build together, steady, enduring, and full of love.